Jambo. I'm Lenrod Nzulu Baraka, founder of Afro-Caribbean Spiritual Teaching Center and Children of Kush publications. These two organizations are dedicated to creating a paradigm shift in Black thought. One of our main objectives is to challenge people of African ancestry to think outside the box of Eurocentric thought. We seek to achieve our objectives through the publication of articles which are circulated through the African Diaspora, through videos like this, which are promoted on social media, and through the publication of books by Children of Kush publication. Children of Kush publication is currently expanding and promoting a series of books entitled Secrets Your Church Won't Tell You. The 6 books in this series are available from the Amazon Kindle store, and they're available in both hard copy and as ebooks. To see our full listing of books, you can go to amazon.com/author/Leonard Phillips. That is amazon.com/author/Leonard Phillips. That's all in lowercase. Or you can just type in Leonard Phillips or Lenrod Nzulu Baraka, or you can just type the title of any book you are interested in. To watch more of my videos on YouTube, just type in Leonard Phillips in lowercase and look for a picture of someone who looks like me. And I said that because there are a number of Leonard Phillips on YouTube. Now, over the years, I have developed a passion for studying the future. I want to know what lies in store for humanity as we move further into this decade and beyond. And so I've read quite a number of books by some of the leading futurists, people like Alvin Toffler, John Nesbitt, Ray Kurzweil, Machio Kaku, John Enriquez. All of these are authors who write about the future. And one of the first books I read by a futurist was Alvin Toffler's Future Shock. Future Shock is the first of a trilogy of books that was written by Toffler. The other two in that trilogy being Third Wave and Power Shift. Now in Future Shock, Toffler basically argues that the acceleration of change was speeding up in the world. And the word future shock basically talks about what happens to people who are unable to cope with the acceleration in the rate of change. I'm therefore a keen follower of trends in science, technology, politics, social life, education, entertainment, the things that have the greatest impact on our lives. Since I majored in religion, I'm especially interested in trends in the religious world. Now, the accident of my birth has placed me in a Judeo-Christian environment. And while I'm on this point, I like to remind people that the religious orientation that most of us embrace very often is simply a matter of the accident of where you were born. We are born here in the Caribbean, where Christianity is the norm. So it is expected that most people in the Caribbean, after being exposed to Christianity, would most likely embrace Christianity. I suspect if I were born in Saudi Arabia or in India, my religious choices may have been very, very different. Now, because of the fact that I have been raised in a Judeo-Christian environment, Over the years, I've spent more time exploring trends in the Abrahamic faith with a greater emphasis on trends in Christianity. In his book, Power Shift, under the chapter heading Yearning for a New Dark Age, Alvin Toffler argues that there are forces at work in the contemporary world that are seeking to restore the monopoly control that organized religion had in pre-Enlightenment times. In other words, he's arguing that religion is trying to stage a comeback and once again enjoy the kind of exercise of power that it had during what historians refer to as the Dark Ages. On page 368 of his book, Power Shift, Toffler writes, and I quote, "Religion is not the enemy of democracy. In a secular, multi-religious society with a clear separation of state and church, the variety of beliefs and non-beliefs add to the vibrance and dynamism of democracy." Toffler adds that tolerance of diversity is the first commandment in a modern society. Now, after making these points, Toffler goes in for the kill and makes the very telling point. On page 368, he states, and I quote, "Yet some of the fastest growing and most powerful religious movements today exhibit this lethal combination." Now, just what is this lethal combination Toffler is referring to? Well, he explains himself. Toffler warns that this lethal combination is, in fact, religious groups that are universalistic, that wish to spread all over the world and embrace every human being. That's kind of like Christianity and Islam, two very universalistic religions who believe that they have a mandate from God to spread their peculiar doctrine and to get as many people all over the world to embrace their doctrine. The other part of the lethal combination, according to Toffler, is religions that insist on totalitarian control over every aspect of the lives of their members. So religions that are universalistic, meaning they want to convert the whole world, and religions that are totalitarian, meaning they want to control every aspect of the lives of those who follow the religion. This is the lethal combination that Toffler is talking about. So what dangers does religious movements who possess this lethal combination hold for the world? Toffler makes this observation. He says, and I quote, "They are determined to seize power over the lives and minds of whole nations, continents, the planet itself, determined to impose their own rule over every aspect of human life, determined to seize state power wherever they can, and to roll back the freedoms that democracy makes possible. They are the agents of the new dark age." End of quote. What Toffler is basically arguing here is that the day religions seize control of state power, freedom and democracy will become a thing of the past wherever this happens. Now, the Caribbean is what I like to call a cosmopolitan region with people from all over the world. In the Caribbean, you can find indigenous Indians, at least the survivors of the genocide that was initiated by the arrival of Europeans in the New World. You have a majority of Africans who were my ancestors who were brought here as a source of slave labor. You have East Indians who were also brought as a part of the labor force in the Caribbean. You have Chinese, you have Jews, you have Syrians, you have Japanese, and you have many other different nationalities. As in other cosmopolitan regions of the world, In the Caribbean, you can find a potpourri of cultures, of norms, of values, of ideas, and of course, of religions. I think it is safe to say that the majority Black population in the Caribbean has a bias toward the Christian religion. This, of course, may be changing since there is a global trend in many democratic countries for a growing number of people to identify as religious nuns or people who have no religious affiliation. Since this is something that is happening in most of the developed world, we can almost expect the same thing to be mirrored within Caribbean societies who were very influenced by what is happening in the outside world. And so in the future, as demographers and people who study trends within the Caribbean do some research, they may very well find that the majority status that Christianity has may in fact be diminishing as more and more people within the Caribbean also begin to identify as nuns or as people with no religious affiliation. Now, in addition to Christians, there are Muslims, there are Jews, there are Hindus, there are practitioners of the African traditional religions. In Haiti, you have Voodoo. In Cuba, you have Santeria. In Trinidad, you have the Orisha Shango. Jamaica, we had the development of the Rastafarian group, and the Rastafarian movement has spread from Jamaica to the rest of the Caribbean and indeed to the wider African diaspora. We also have the Baha'is, we have the Mormons who, even though they use Christian terminology, many people define the Mormons as a separate denomination, not as a separate religion, I should say, not as a denomination within Christianity. Now, if you search hard enough, you may very well find adherents to many other religious traditions. As a matter of fact, I'm almost certain that in the Caribbean, you may be able to find a few Satanists and Luciferians as well. Now, on April 1st, 1969, the Anglican Church Act effectively disestablished the Anglican Church as the state church of Barbados. I suspect that disestablishment of the church is the norm in most, if not all, Caribbean islands. Against this backdrop of the Caribbean being a cosmopolitan region, the religiously plural nature of the Caribbean, and the fact that we have gone the route of disestablishing churches so that we no longer have any state churches, it should be of great concern when we find clerics and members of religious communities clamoring for favor and protection of their brand of spirituality by the state. In the build-up to the shift from a constitutional monarchy to a republic, the governor of Barbados introduced a new charter. The new charter used the term creator as opposed to God. Now, the term creator, in my opinion, is more appropriate because it is more inclusive. Now, with the many religions that we have, it is almost certain that many of them believe in a first cause, a creator. So in using the term creator, that makes it more inclusive because the other religions would be able to identify with the term creator. So creator is more inclusive and is a far better choice of words in a pluralist society. Now, some of the Christian community took offense because they felt that the use of the word creator did not give their conception of God sufficient prominence. The question that needs to be answered here is, why should any religious organization want the government to promote their peculiar brand or understanding of divinity or spirituality? Barbados is not a theocracy. Barbados is not the nation of Israel under the Torah. Barbados is not Europe under the papacy. Barbados is not Iran or Afghanistan under Sharia law. Barbados is a secular, religiously plural state, which just happens to have a majority of Christians. So the question that I raised previously is a very good question to ask, especially since even within Christianity, there's not a unified understanding of deity. What do I mean by that? Some Christians believe that deity is a composite union of three in one, which is referred to as the Trinity concept of deity. Ironically, the founder of Christianity, Jesus, was a strict monotheist. He was not a Trinitarian. Jesus embraced the concept that the deity that he believed in was one being, and he called that one being his Father. Jesus is therefore on record calling his Father the only true God. So why are Christians clamoring for the promotion of a concept of deity that was rejected by Jesus himself? Would it not be far better for Christians to spend more of their time working out their theological differences, as well as dealing with the moral fallout of all of the scandals involving clerics that have reached international headlines over the past years? I suspect this would be a far better use of the time of Christians. Christians need to stick to their lane and leave our duly elected members of parliament to do their job of creating a freer, more just, more equitable society within the Caribbean. Just something for you to think about. We're going to take a break at this point. When I come back, I will be looking at the subject of slavery in the Bible. See you shortly. Welcome back. Now, in the previous presentation, there are two corrections that I'd like to make. You would recall that I mentioned the name Carol Anderson and a book that Miss Carol Anderson had written, which looked at the advances and then how there were backlashes against the advances that Black people were making throughout the diaspora, but she was specifically referring to what was happening in North America, and she called her book White Rage. So that's the title of the book. I think I may have mentioned the title of the book as White Lash or Backlash, the book by Carol Anderson. The title is White Rage. And then when I was talking about the changing of the filibuster rule, I made mention of John Manchin. It should have been Joe Manchin. That is Joe Manchin. He was one of the two Democratic senators that opposed the changing of the filibuster rule. Okay, so now we've made those two corrections. Let's get into our subject, which is slavery in the Bible. Now, this is a topic that people can get a little emotional about because it seems as though you are being critical of the Bible, and most people do have a problem with anything that seems to be critical of the Bible. But I keep telling people that facts are facts, and we have to be able to deal with facts. We have to be able to rise above emotion and look at facts for what they are. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this presentation, the facts about slavery in the Bible. Now, in the heart of the Ten Commandments, and I'd like to make the point that the Ten Commandments is considered by practitioners of the Abrahamic faith to be the most evolved moral code ever given to man. So in the heart of this most evolved moral code, we have a reference to manservants and maidservants. And this reference comes in the context of the Sabbath Commandment. Now, on the Sabbath day, or as Jews will tell you, on the seventh day of the week, which is called Saturday, Jews were supposed to observe a period of rest. Shabbat, as the Jews call the Sabbath, was a period when Jews would cease from their secular physical labor and they would give time to meditation, give time to spiritual education. It was a period of rest. But not only was the Jew supposed to experience the Shabbat rest, if the Jew had slaves, if he had servants, manservants and maidservants, these servants, these slaves, were also supposed to be given that period of Shabbat rest as well, which was a very good thing if you were a slave of a Jew and the Jew observed Shabbat. The Jew was supposed to give you Shabbat as well. So you were supposed to rest from your labors on that day. I have to do some research to figure out how Jews within the Caribbean, especially in Amsterdam, well, not in Amsterdam, in New Amsterdam, in South America, how they would have featured, because I know that there were Jewish plantations. And I have to do some research to figure out how the Jewish plantations in the Caribbean, how they related to the principle of giving their slaves Shabbat. When I do that research, I'll get back and we'll talk about that as well. Now, implied in the Sabbath Commandment, therefore, is a tacit condoning of the institution of slavery, because it makes mention of manservants and maidservants. And remember, we're talking about the most evolved moral code according to the Abrahamic faith that was ever given to man. Here we have a mention of slavery right there. Now, the centrality of the Ten Commandments, past and present, with its tacit condoning of the institution of slavery, constitute a solid basis for arguing that slavery is both normative and accepted in the Bible. Now, if slavery is normative and accepted in the Bible, we are left to wonder why the God of the Bible was so upset with the enslavement of the Jews by the African Egyptians. Anyone looking at the normative nature of slavery in the Bible and the holy terror rained down on some Africans who were reported to have enslaved the Jews is left to wonder and perhaps to conclude that the only slavery the Bible is really against is slavery which involves the enslavement of Jews by Africans or others. Now, Bible apologists are very quick to point out that there were some major differences between slavery, the slavery that was condoned in the Bible, and the slavery that was practiced in the New World by European Christians. And one must admit there is some truth to that. There were some very fundamental differences. But the differences that exist, that's not the whole story, because as you are going to see, there were two forms of slavery that were described in the Bible. One form of slavery was a very mild and gentle form of slavery, but then there was the more rude and crude form of slavery, which was also practiced by the Jews. Now, the apologists for the slavery in the Bible will point to passages like Exodus chapter 21 and verse 2, which says, "When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year he shall go free for nothing." In other words, if a Jew found himself in a position where he had to sell himself to someone, to another Jew, that person was supposed to be in that state of bondage for just 6 years. In the 6th year, the master of the Jew was supposed to set him free. Now, that's a good thing. 6 years of service, after the 6 years of service, you were supposed to be set free. Very, very positive. Deuteronomy chapter 29 and verse 39 says, "If your brother becomes poor beside you and sells himself to you, you shall not make him serve as a slave." So here's another very good thing for the Jew. If you were a Jew and you found yourself in a state of poverty and you had to sell yourself to another Jew, the person was not supposed to treat you as a slave. That's another important distinction. Deuteronomy 15, verses 12 and 13, it says, "And if thy brother, an Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee, and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let him go free from thee. And when thou sendest him out free from thee, thou shalt not let him go away empty." Now, I like this. If you had a Hebrew slave, at the end of that 6-year period, you were supposed to set him free, but you weren't just supposed to set the person free just like that. You had to make sure that the person was given some substance. You had to give them reparations. You had to pay them for their period of bondage, which they were made to suffer for that period where they served you as the master. And I think this is a very good thing, because not only were the Jews supposed to give reparations after 6 years to any Jew that was held in bondage, but when you go back to the book of Genesis, Genesis 15, verse 13 and 14, where it talked about the period that the Israelites were going to spend in Egypt as in bondage, the text basically says that after the period of bondage, when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they were supposed to borrow jewelry from the Egyptians. Now, that borrowing was not literal borrowing, because I don't think they were going to go back to give back the Egyptians the jewelry that they borrowed. That was wages for their period of bondage in Egypt. That was reparations. And I'm talking about this because right now there's a movement here within the Caribbean led by Sir Hilary Beckles and a number of other eminent Caribbean persons who are trying to push for reparations to be paid to us here in the Caribbean. I'm certain there is a movement for reparation also in North America and in Britain. And I suspect that the Brazilians may also be pushing for it, and the Africans as well. Because all of these countries, whether it's Black people in the Caribbean, Black people in Europe, Black people in South America, Black people in North America, all of us, we suffered as a result of what was done to our ancestors. The wounds of slavery have not healed fully. And just like how the Jews were given reparations, not only in biblical times, but also as a result of the Jewish Holocaust, Germany basically had to pay reparations to the Jewish community. When the North American government interred Japanese in the Second World War, the American government also paid reparation to Japanese. Now, I'm certain there are other groups who have received reparation because of the ill treatment of European powers. So my question is, if the Jews could receive reparations, if the Japanese could receive reparations, if other ethnic groups could receive reparations, why is it that Black people are not also entitled to reparations? So I firmly am of the opinion that the groups here in the Caribbean and others should continue to press. And in one of my books, I made mention of the fact that we should seek some kind of representation with the Pope Francis and the Archbishop of Canterbury and leaders of other religious organizations, impressing on them the need for some kind of moral crusade to get the European powers to pay reparations to the descendants of African slaves. Okay, moving on. Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 43. Again, another very positive text about slavery. It says, "You shall not rule over him ruthlessly, but you shall fear your God." So in other words, when a Jew had another Jew under his power as a bondsman, he was not supposed to deal with him in a ruthless way. That's a very positive thing. Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verse 7. It says, "If a man is found stealing one of his brothers of the people of Israel, if he treats him as a slave or sells him, then that thief shall die. So shall you purge the evil from your midst." Now, this is a very powerful text. I like this text. It says that if someone engaged in human trafficking involving Jews, that incurred the death penalty. And I always tell people that this should have been the rule in the Bible about slavery and human trafficking. Anybody who engaged in slavery or human trafficking should have incurred the death penalty. But as we shall see, this was not the case across the board. This only applied to Jews. When a Jew was involved in human trafficking, or when a Jew was treated as a slave, the Bible takes the position that this is a moral evil. Now, I am a little outraged that the Bible did not view the enslavement of others as equally a moral evil as well. That would have been a very good stance for the Bible to have taken. So what then do we find from these texts? Let's summarize. Number one, slavery involving Jews was limited to 6 years. Number two, the person could not be treated like a slave. They were just supposed to be treated as kind of like an indentured servant. Number three, when they were set free, they had to be given reparations. They were supposed to go with some substance, some gold, some shekels, some silver, some kind of currency so that they could set their lives up again. Number four, there was a death penalty for selling or enslaving the Jews. And number five, slavery and human trafficking of Jews was declared to be a moral evil. Now, all of these nice texts that are usually quoted by Bible apologists, if you listen very carefully, you would have found that there's a commonality in all of the texts. All of these texts applied exclusively to Jews. Now let's look at the other kind of slavery that is found in the Bible, because as I said, the slavery that involved Jews, that was not the only kind of slavery in the Bible. Leviticus chapter 25, verses 44 and 46. It says, as for male and female slaves, whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. You may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you and their clans that are with you. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. You shall make slaves of them, but over your brother you shall not rule one over another ruthlessly. So here we find some fundamental differences. Jews could buy slaves from the nation surrounding them, from the Canaanites. Now, if you know your Bible genealogy, you would know that the Canaanites were descendants of Ham. Now, Ham, Cush, Nimrod, all of those were supposed to be brothers. The theologians will tell you that these were black people. So Canaan, Ham, Nimrod, Cush, that's the black strain. So it was perfectly okay for the Jews to buy slaves from the Canaanites. Secondly, they could buy slaves from the people who sojourn among them. Like, for example, there were Egyptians. There was a mixed multitude who, according to the book of Exodus, left Egypt with the Israelites. So the Jews could buy slaves of this mixed multitude. And since they were Egyptians, it meant then that the Jews could buy black slaves. Okay, that's what this text is saying. Not only is this text saying that the Jews could literally buy slaves from the nations surrounding them and from the mixed multitude and the other nations that were a part who joined themselves onto Israel. But if you read this text carefully, you will discover that that 6-year thing did not apply in this case, because father could bequeath those slaves, this category of slaves could be bequeathed as a possession from generation to generation. They could be passed on from one generation to the next. And notice the use of the term forever. It was a state of perpetual bondage, perpetual slavery. So that's a very fundamental difference between this form of slavery and the other form of slavery that was practiced on the Jewish nation itself. Let's look at another text, Exodus chapter 21, verses 20 and 21. It says, when a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and the slave die under his hand, he shall be avenged. But if the slave survives a day or two, he shall not be avenged, for the slave is his money. Now, here you find a situation where the Jews were told in this text that basically they could beat their slaves, providing, of course, the slave did not die within a day or two. Now, that sounds like some heavy duty beating to me. All the Jew had to do was to make sure he didn't beat the slave until they died. Now, this was not something that applied to Jewish slaves, because the Jewish slave could not be treated as a slave. So I doubt very much that the Jews could beat one another or could beat a Jew who was sold into bondage. So this is another fundamental difference. Let's look at another difference. Deuteronomy chapter 21 and verse 10. It says, when you go to war against your enemy, and the Lord your God gives them into your hand, and you take them captives, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire to take her to your wife, and you bring her home to your house, she shall shave her head and bear her nails. So in other words, when the Jews went out to war against the Canaanites and the other nations surrounding them, if they saw a beautiful woman among the captives were treated as spoils of war. So in other words, if a man saw a woman among the captives that he liked, he could take her home and make her his wife. Now, that's a good thing, because when you look at chattel slavery in the Caribbean and North America, and I suspect in South America as well, there were miscegenation laws. White people who are Caucasians who married Black people or who got involved with Black people, very often there were laws that could result in the white people being fined, or in some cases even in prison, or even losing their possession just for getting into a relationship with a person of African ancestry. Now, with the Jews, it was a little different. The Jews, because of the fact that Judaism and the religion of the Jews were so intimately tied in, when a Jew, before they had sex, they had to be married. So the Jewish law required that these men marry their servants or their slaves if they saw a beautiful woman who was basically a slave or a servant. Exodus chapter 21, verses 26 and 27, it says, when a man strikes the eye of his slave, male or female, and that slave, he shall let the slave go free because of his eye. If he knocks out the tooth of his slave, male or female, he shall let the slave go free because of his tooth. Now, there was a law of eye for eye and tooth for tooth. If you knocked out the eye of someone in Jewish culture, if a Jew knocked out another Jew's eye, it was eye for eye. But this rule did not apply to the slaves. The good thing here, however, was that if a Jew knocked out the eye or knocked out the tooth of a slave, they were supposed to set the slave free. So that was a very good thing. So let's do a little summary. We find that Hamitic Canaanites and those from the nations surrounding Israel, these people could be bought and sold as slaves. Number two, this category of slaves were slaves for life. There was no release after 6 years. Number three, they were property and could be bequeathed or passed on from one generation to the next. Number four, they could be beaten with impunity, provided they did not die within a day or two. Number five, they were treated as spoils of war, as we just read about when you had a captive and you saw a woman that you liked. Women could be treated as spoils of war. Number six, the eye for eye, tooth for tooth rule did not apply to this category of slaves. And lastly, the enslavement or human trafficking of foreign slaves was not considered as a moral evil, and there was no death penalty attached or applied to the enslavement of people from the nations surrounding Israel. Now, the New Testament does not basically take a different direction to the Old Testament. I always say it would have been nice if Jesus in the Beatitudes could have made that point that I referred to a little earlier, that anyone who enslaves another human being shall be subject to capital punishment, and that all slavery was a moral evil. I really would have wished that Jesus could have included that one in the thoughts from the Mount of Blessings, but we find it in the New Testament that the system of slavery was pretty much intact. And within the New Testament, you find that tacit condoning of slavery as well. Within the New Testament, slaves were encouraged to obey, to submit, and honor their masters. There's an instance in the New Testament where the Apostle Paul, as he was preaching, he came across a runaway slave, Onesimus, and Paul's counsel to this runaway slave was that he should go back to his master. Now, this is a very interesting story because I read in Deuteronomy chapter 23 and verse 15, it says, "You shall not give up to his master a slave who has escaped from him to you." So in other words, the text in, there's this text in Deuteronomy that says, if a slave escapes and he comes in your dwelling, you were not supposed to give the slave back up to his master. But here we find in the New Testament, Paul recommending to this slave who had been converted on this preaching that he go back and serve his master once again. So the New Testament pretty much also condones the institution of slavery as well. So what then can we conclude? Slavery is present in both Old and New Testament. Most of the positive texts that we read about slavery applied only to the Jews. And that was not really slavery, but mainly a form of indentured servanthood. Human trafficking and slavery involving Jews was punishable by death and was considered as a moral evil. It was open season, however, for slaves who were non-Jews. These non-Jewish slaves could be bought, they could be sold, they could be beaten. There was no release after 6 years. They were a possession that could be bequeathed from generation to generation. And of course, we said that the slavery of non-Jews was not counted as a moral evil. Slavery is therefore labeled as bad when Jews are the subject of slavery. The enslavement of non-Jews, however, is endorsed by the Bible and the God of the Bible. That is my conclusion from what I have studied about slavery in the Bible. Now, in my next presentation, I will explore how this double standard on the question of slavery in the Bible laid the foundation for anti-Blackness that can be found in all of the Abrahamic faiths. As always, thanks for watching this presentation. Feel free to like and share this video with your friends and family in the African diaspora and on the continent of Africa. Also, feel free to leave your comments in the space below this YouTube video. Do you think the Bible supports slavery? Share your views. I'd love to hear from you. Asante sana na kwaheri, which means thank you very much and goodbye.